our business has just changed and morphed so much. A physical space is interesting because like our business changes so much. It changes all the time. And that's the cool thing, especially with a software product or anything digital, is you can just tear it apart, rebuild it. It's malleable, and it doesn't take a ton of investment to modify because you're dealing in bits in technology in for the most part. Whereas an office space, it's like you build it and that's what you have until you want to go spend a bunch more capital to go remodel it, 3 years later, if you want to do that. And then you're like, why am I remodeling a beautiful office space 3 years later? But you kind of just like physical, you're stuck with what you have. So it's been interesting watching our business change so much from a structure standpoint, team standpoint, model standpoint, but then still have this office space that is what it is.
Yeah.
So it's like some things we got perfectly right. That's great. And then other things we got totally wrong, but it just is what it is for right now until we can go somewhere else, which is going to be a while.
So would you consider yourself a technology company now?
Now, yeah. Yeah. So we started media company and we still have a big media component of our business. But when people are like, you worried about competition or whatever it is, it's like, no, because I think we have pretty well-defined path for that side of the business. And that used to be 100% of our revenue, like media, photo, video. And now this year it'll be less than 20% of our revenue.
It's a major shift.
It's a major shift. And there's a lot of creative services revenue that is on top of the just media. And then we have the software revenue. And then we have the leadership event, the summit revenue and live events.
Because it seems from me following that it's much, my takeaway from the outside looking at it is much more moving towards almost like training in some ways.
Yeah.
Skilled labor.
Yeah. We're less than 2 years into being a software company and having a training product. Okay. And so there's still a lot to learn. And while I don't think the software at the end of the day is going to be just training, there's no way I see it just as a training product. We went software in the beginning because media is not, creative work is not scalable. It's like a construction company. You have to go win more work, and then you have to go do the work. And so we could intimately impact, 50 great contractors at any one time, but we couldn't impact hundreds of contractors, thousands of contractors doing that unless we just scaled for years and years and years and years. But that's a long path. That's a lot of capital. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of moving pieces. Can you even keep the quality up? There's so many questions. And is that the best thing to do? And we ultimately came to, well, no, let's keep that business growing because that's really important. It keeps us grounded and keeps us very well connected. But let's go to something more scalable, which is software. And then the cool thing about software is it's recurring revenue, which increases the overall value of the organization substantially beyond the value you can create with creative, which then gives us more opportunities in creative and in everything else we're doing if we're increasing that enterprise value so that we can use capital more efficiently and move it in different places we couldn't otherwise.
Yeah, no, I get that.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, well, some days it makes sense, other days doesn't, but we're figuring it out.
It's sometimes more capital can mean more problems,
100%. I think that was one of the biggest mistakes we've made is we raised too much money to begin with. I think if we had raised a tenth of what we raised initially, we would have been a lot better prepared for capital as we typically you go raise, a little bit, then you go raise a little bit more, then you go raise a little bit more. Whereas we just raised a lot right off the bat and we just weren't equipped for it. And then we spent it and then, you spend it and capital money just doesn't grow on trees, as you're aware. And so when you go to the money tree for more money and you find out there's no more money in the money tree, then you have to go pay the piper and go make a whole long list of decisions. And most of them are terrible decisions to make, no fun for anybody. But then on the other side of that, you're better off for it. You're healthier. And we're on the other side of that kind of right now. And so it's really easy for me to sit here and say, like, well, in hindsight, this is what we should have done, but that's what everybody does. Yeah. And so I'm glad we've learned the lessons. I'm glad we're here. Glad we have this year to look forward to, the next few years to look forward to. I think it's going to be a ton of fun, and it'll be a bunch more chaos. Who knows what even the next 6 months are going to look like, but we'll just take it one day at a time.
I think in small business, you have to pivot,
Yes. You have to.
So,
yeah. If you look up, success stories, so rarely is what the company, is like what the company's known for was probably not the initial product or initial offering or whatever it was. Like Apple today, really iPhone is the primary platform, but the phone didn't exist when they were beginning as a business.
Yeah.
It's just a dramatically different company. Or Netflix, they didn't start internet streaming. They were a DVD service. You can go down the list and look at most businesses and how they were totally different.
Did you guys deploy almost like a blue ocean strategy when you started thinking this way, or did it just naturally evolve?
I think that's a common misconception, is that you sit down and you make a business plan.
Yeah.
And the business plan lays out the next 5 years and you have everything figured out, and then you just go execute the business plan. I don't think that's at all true. I think you have an initial concept, an initial way to provide value. And then as you go down that path, you start to see other opportunities or improve upon the initial opportunity in a different way that you didn't really conceive when you started. And I think that's what I did when I began. There was like a blue ocean consideration, and that was, I want to go build my brand. I want to go tell stories. What unique story do I have to offer that isn't really out there? And when it came to earth moving big equipment, there wasn't much out there. So I could go compete. I've talked a lot about this. I could go compete with 1 million nature photographers that are all extraordinary at what they do. And maybe after, chipping away and working hard, I could compete one day, or I could just focus over here that is earth moving, heavy equipment, something I really loved, and not really compete. Just wide open ball game, which has its own set of challenges when you're somewhat pioneering something, because you take a lot of arrows and there's no blueprint to follow. It's a lot easier to build a business modeled off other businesses, because you at least have, it's not easier, but you at least have a blueprint.
Yeah, that's true. You're really it's kind of being a catalyst, because you don't know what's behind the curtain.
You have no idea. Yeah, you have no idea. I think a lot of construction companies have been very frustrated with us over the past 6 years, because we've always changed, and it seems like we're going after the next shiny object and and this and that. But it's like, no, we're just learning and adapting and growing. And do we get it all right? Absolutely not. We've done so many stupid things, and I understand their frustration in a lot of ways, but we're truly pioneering in a sense. And that's very different from a heavy construction company that's been doing this, doing what they've been doing for 75 years. They're pioneering in some ways, but not nearly as quickly as we are.
Right.
So it's you're just operating at different wavelengths, it creates some frustration.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's my story. We're not here to hear my story, though. We have enough of that. How did I even get, who connected us originally?
I was thinking about that on the way here. The guy that has the equipment rental radio talk show out of Australia.
Oh, wow. I would have never guessed that. I see. Okay.
And I was talking to him, early on at the beginning of ERG, and he was telling me that you were down here. And I'd heard people in our office talking about you guys, and that's how we got connected.
I see. And so that was when you were doing equipment rental.
Correct.
Equipment rental. And that was, how long was that venture?
Well, I mean, truthfully, it started the beginning of 2021, but I mean, it took some time to put the thesis together and kind of raise the capital. And we partnered with an equity firm. But I'd been previously in and around the equipment rental business since 2004. Ever since I got out of college, I started with Hertz Equipment, worked at RSC United, and then had a stint at Mobile Mini.
Mobile Mini.
Storage container company, which was great.
Yeah.
And then just really had a desire to, start my own equipment rental business with the local players because, it was so many bigger companies getting bigger.
The equipment rental space has been, since you've been in it in 2004, it's totally changed.
Yeah.
And now you have these monsters that just get bigger and bigger and bigger, it seems like, every year.
Yeah.
What have the big changes to equipment rental been like to you?
I would say the biggest thing has probably obviously been the technology.
Yeah.
Starting back when I started, Hertz Equipment was the largest.
Okay.
Which now I think they've probably only got, and I don't know exactly, under 500 locations, whereas United's a lot larger and they've continued to get bigger and bigger. But the way that people order has changed. And what I've been noticing most recently, even kind of being out of it, is more and more people are ordering online.
I see.
And, it's not the same of when you order a car. It's a little bit of a cumbersome process for most people if they're equipped to use technology.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because there's still so many contractors that don't use technology for ordering. And rental's like a moving variable. It's not always a fixed cost. But I think where the car rental industry is so far ahead is a lot of times if you order something online, the cost,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's probably been the biggest thing that's changed is I feel like more and more people are getting vulnerable and accurate about quoting because of technology.
Yeah. And I first talked about this, I think, with Jonathan Campbell. He's at Wheeler Machinery, the Utah cat dealer. And he explained, and it's totally true, how, nowadays, especially with the next generation coming up, you're not compared to your peers. You're compared to the overall marketplace. And so I'm used to renting a car very easily with a very nice interface. I can compare prices very easily. I can go compare the different car options. I can select different features. And within 7 minutes, I know exactly what I'm paying. I know exactly where I'm picking it up. Everything is extraordinary nowadays. It still blows me away how easy it is to rent a car. Every time I do it, I'm just like, I cannot believe it is this straightforward to get a $70,000 vehicle, to just drive off with a $70,000 vehicle. And then if I'm 28 years old running a company, or now helping to manage equipment or managing a job for a bigger company, and I'm having to rent equipment, that's my expectation. Yeah. So then I come to these companies with that expectation, and it is a mile apart, which is frustrating to me, even though that this company has a way better platform than this rental company. That's not what I'm comparing it to. I'm comparing it to Hertz Rent-A-Car and my experience over here, or how easy it is to buy something off Amazon, or how simple it is for me to choose a new song on my iPhone. Like, that's the user experience I'm used to. And the equipment world is still, in a lot of ways, just way far away from that.
Yeah.
Way far away.
I think that's what's exciting about it, is because the rental in general still has such a long way to go. If you really do think about it, because of the user experience. And there's so much opportunity. I mean, even outside of equipment rental, inside of these different specialty rental categories because of what you're saying. And I think the solid thing about some of these larger companies is, they work every day to try to figure that stuff out. They want to keep market share and keep the customers happy. And I've thought about that too before. For me, I always thought about the car rental starting as a consumer experience, whereas equipment rental, it kind of started to me almost thinking in terms of business first. So it's not as customized for the user,
I see.
Which I do think that's changing. And I kind of went down a massive rabbit hole about 18 months ago about how rental started. Because I just wanted to know. I'd been in it for 20 years. I'd read some articles, and just I was curious more so than anything. And what I found is it actually started back in the 1800s from people renting China and New Orleans for parties. And it was kind of stagnant for a little while. I mean, slow to progress. But as the World Wars happened, World War II, people started to move their families across country in moving vans, moving trailers. And you had this mix of different rental options with moving trailers, and people were just kind of figuring it out. They were the pioneers back then. What else could you rent? A lot of homeowner stuff would happen, things of that nature. So it was kind of it was a slow start, like anything. But to see where it is today, I mean, it's kind of wild to imagine how far it's even come.
Yeah, and it seems like even I got into the industry when I was 18, so I've been around 10 years, which isn't that long, but that's enough time to see changes, at least in some ways. And in the rental market has gotten, it seems like way bigger. And maybe that's just because the overall market's growing, but I feel like rental as a percentage of equipment is bigger than it was 10 years ago. I could be wrong. That's purely anecdotal.
I think you're right. I mean, I don't have any exact stats, but one of the biggest things that changed most recent was just, and I mean, that time frame is probably the mix of the telehandler, because, a lot of people would use scaffolding. And that today is one of the biggest things that I've seen personally shift, is more and more people are using lifts, telehandlers for improving the efficiency of their project versus scaffolding or moving things around by hand. So whenever something like that happens, there's obviously more demand,
Yeah. Well, now, I mean, like next door, the whole thing's built with those little scissor lifts.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably 20 of them per floor, and those guys just sit in there. They just zoom around on scissor lifts all day long, and they can get to wherever they need to be on that ceiling.
Yeah.
Like that. No scaffolding, no nonsense. They just zoom around. Yeah. Sweet. Huh. Yeah, I guess too, it's not just the big time, it's not like the Hertz, it's not the Uniteds, but it's also companies like Equipment Share and some other companies now that have, I think, a different model. Like, is Equipment Share's model nowadays all that different from a United? Or are they approached it differently, but now they're just at such a size where they somewhat have to operate like a traditional rental company? I'm kind of talking out of my ass right now, but it just feels like they're all over the place now.
Yeah, I may be as well, but my viewpoint is they kind of started as a technology company.
Yeah.
And then evolved more into the asset space.
I see.
And obviously now they have much bigger locations, a lot more assets. And so they have evolved, in my opinion, to more of a larger player in size.
That's what it seems like. Yeah.
And, the exact dollar amount, I don't really know, but I mean, they're a sizable company for sure.
They're huge. Yeah, they're huge. With the rental companies, and you just alluded to this, and I guess starting your own rental company, you said you had to go get capital because it's super intensive from a capital standpoint. You have to go, if you want to go rent a scissor lift, you have to acquire that scissor lift before you can go rent it.
Yeah.
And so everything in your fleet you have to acquire in some capacity before you can even create a business out of it. How do you navigate all that?
Well, you got to have a decision on which way you're going to go. To if somebody's going to take a traditional loan out, are they going to go the route of SBA, high net worth individuals? I had the opportunity with a partner to try to figure out what was the easiest way to grow the fastest, and because that's where my mindset was then. Is how fast can I grow and how quickly can we get essentially to the next level? And it ended up being through the route of private equity. And I think if anybody decides to go out and take that route, obviously you have to have a company to acquire.
Yeah.
Which the first company that we acquired was River City Equipment, and one location in Nashville, one in Decatur, one in Muscle Shoals. So that was kind of the starting point. And I think a lot of times, like all things, private equity kind of gets a bad name, but it's not all bad. Usually there's like an extreme situation, and then there's like the whole other end of it where it's great. And my experience, at least dealing with the investors that we had and still have today, because I'm still an investor in the business, was they were really genuine and very collaborative, very respectful. And my opinion of private equity has definitely changed by going through that process. And I think the only way to go from 3 locations to 40 in 2.5, 3 years, you got to have some outside capital.
Yeah, no kidding. So the initial business thesis was that there's an opportunity for a more local rental company here in the South, here in Nashville, starting in Nashville, I guess.
Yeah, well, River City was originally headquartered in Decatur.
Decatur.
But
That's Alabama?
Yeah. Okay. Decatur and Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and obviously Nashville. Smyrna.
Okay. So the initial thesis was, hey, there's these giant rental organizations, but there's an opportunity to potentially roll up some of these smaller mom and pop shops, but keep it more of a local equipment rental feel.
Yeah.
That's
exactly what it was. And I think I was kind of surprised personally on just the connection that we had with a lot of the owners, even outside of the thesis. Is like most of them were looking for someone like us to come and acquire them.
Yeah.
And, by not changing the name then and keeping a lot of the employees, that goes a long way. It's not to say that the big companies don't do that. It's just more of a focus on truly like a family type atmosphere, culture, things of that nature. And it was also kind of a bit unusual. Some people have done roll up strategies, but going through the way that we did, I think it was somewhat different by keeping a lot of the companies and names intact.
I see. So and it's similar to construction in a lot of ways, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but these companies, family businesses, they're owned by maybe a single shareholder, maybe 2 shareholders. It's been in the family. Maybe it's multi-generational, second generation, their father started it or whatever it is, but there's really no succession plan to it. And there's really no next generation actively involved in the business. And so their only real option to take their chips off the table is to sell to somebody or just liquidate their balance sheet and close the business.
That's similar in a lot of ways. And what I've learned through time is you may have a relative in the business and they're thinking they're going to turn the business over to that relative. Well, let's just say that Johnny's the son. He may not want to actually own that business when the time comes. And they've had this thought in their head for 10 or 15 years that would happen. And then they're kind of looking for an exit strategy, So I think in some cases it's not even a fully aligned exit strategy. And the other thing is if you turn it over to a relative, in some cases you kind of still stay connected. Because it's not just coming up and getting coffee. A lot of these families are close, and so it spills over into, well, there was a sale, but they may have stayed connected to it. And I don't know about construction, but I would assume a lot of that is very similar because they're similar. It's blue collar, very similar culture.
Yeah. Well, and I think a common misconception of people that work for construction companies or rental companies or whatever it is that these people are just loaded. And it's like on paper, maybe if you look at their balance sheet and you look at all the machines that they have, for example, and the property and whatever they have, it's like, wow, they have a lot of stuff, but that stuff's not worth anything unless you go sell it to somebody else. Yeah. So your whole worth is tied up in this business, which isn't worth anything from a liquidity standpoint, from a paper money standpoint, unless you go take it and give it to somebody else.
That's very true. And I mean, a lot of times it's more debt and more stress by having less.
Yeah.
It's really to kind of go on to what you're saying. And I mean, I admire anybody that's gone out and started a construction company or any type of startup with even equipment, because as you know, it's hard to start a business, much less to be successful.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with a lot of debt and big machines, small machines, like there's a lot of responsibility goes into that. And it's pretty cool when you see success stories that happen, because there's obviously, I mean, it's pretty isolating for some of these people because they're the only decision maker.
Sure.
In some cases.
Yeah.
And they don't have like a business partner in some cases to talk to. They may have a mentor, maybe not, but they're making a lot of important decisions for a lot of families. And so that's where I've tried to, help other entrepreneurs, even outside of rental.
Well, and it's even worse, I feel like, in construction or an industry like this, because it's so competitive. You're always, it's just hyper competitive. You're always beating each other up. And so you can't really be friends with the other guy in town that does what you do. Because you're trying to beat them up. They're trying to beat you up from a business sense. And sometimes I see good relationships between contractors, but most of the time it's like, they have a business relationship. They're a subcontractor to this company or whatever it is. But if it's two companies competing, very rarely do I see an actually like a good, healthy relationship between them two, which I don't, that's what I would expect. But it's even, there's only a few people in your area doing this, and you can't really talk to them about how or why they're doing it. And so you really are just on an island.
True. And I used to be that way. Like I really would say just don't like the competition and felt like, let's go kick their ass, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm still competitive, but I've grown to appreciate competitors. And I mean, even with these bigger companies, it's not exactly easy to do what they've done,
No.
And I think it's healthy to have a mutual respect while still being competitive. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because you never know when you're going to work together.
Yeah.
Or the companies may merge, or you may find yourself working for them. It's kind of a small world after all. But I think that's one of the things I've learned is just being open-minded to strategic relationships,
So the first rental company you bought, how did you, before you went to, or when you went to private equity, did you have this already lined up, or was it really just a thesis? Hey, I need some dry powder here. I have some leads. I'm not quite sure how this is going to pencil out yet. What was the order of operations?
Well, I didn't know anything about private equity, so I immersed myself in courses. And went through a pretty extensive course on how to raise capital in private equity. Because I didn't really learn a lot in school. I just didn't pay attention. Everything I've learned, even now, I take a lot of courses. And so then I learned really what a deal thesis was, what value creation is, how to present to private equity firms, what the roles and titles are, and how to understand their lingo. Once I figured all that out, it was more or less of finding people around me and a business partner that complemented my weaknesses, And so the pipeline was there because I was in the South, been in the business for a while, understood the companies to acquire. It was just more of a position of selling them on the opportunity. And our investors had experience in this space. But I didn't exactly start that way. I kind of began pitching to like healthcare companies and technology companies, and they kind of looked at me like I had a third eye.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't speaking their lingo. And then finally I was like, okay, I've got to start finding people in rental experience and equity. And dude, there just wasn't a lot.
Sure.
I mean, there were some bigger players like Platinum and people like that, but it was very small in that window from what I could find.
Yeah, and I've had to immerse myself in a similar world over the past year, and I'm still not even, I don't think I'm all that educated because it's such a tangled web. It's a very weird world. But yeah, I feel like most of them are in the sexy stuff, the real estate, the financial, whatever it is, the healthcare, the technology.
Yeah.
And when you start talking to them about forklifts,
I know it's too risky, man.
It does. Well, it goes even more than that. Like you have to, like, very simply educate them on, like,
oh yeah,
here's how like we, for our example, we're starting with training, video-based training. And so when you go to a private equity firm, they know what video-based training is. It's like, yeah, that's been around a while. This isn't anything groundbreaking, but you have to explain, like, no. Like, we're doing this in a world that has never really had formal training ever. Like, I need more training to run a forklift in an Amazon warehouse than I do a 400-ton mining truck. And they're like, no, there's no way. I'm like, yeah. Like, no, seriously. I there's an actual certification for forklifts, but not for other stuff. And you have to back it all the way up. But even then, there's such a gap. There really isn't a deal to be made, even if they have the money, and even if you have the opportunity. You have to find the right folks first of all. So you go get some capital. You find your right partner. How do you approach the company to first buy? How does that conversation even go? Like, have them out to lunch. Like, so Phil, here's what I'm thinking.
We met through a mutual acquaintance, so I was fortunate to kind of have that connection and just, really shared with the owner kind of what the vision was, and we knew that we wanted to grow it and expand, but we really wanted to make a difference in the Southeast specifically. And so the Southeast obviously has a strong culture of God, country, and freedom. And in the beginning, I kept thinking, well, I guess this is just our core values is God, country, and freedom.
Yeah.
But it was more or less, highlighting the sincerity of the people. And I think that's the only reason that we were successful in influencing not just the first owner, but several different ones is, a true sincerity about the care for the people, because I've always thought that the people are the greatest asset, not the asset themselves. Whereas in some cases, when you get into buying companies, people are strictly looking for asset value, performance opportunities,
head count.
Yeah.
And
I just never felt that was going to be the right path. And so it's like, how can we get the best skills out of the existing people?
Well, because rental, sure, it's an asset heavy business, but it's a service business.
Oh, yeah.
If I rent a piece of equipment from you and it breaks and it's holding up a pretty expensive part of my job, which is most jobs in construction, if not every job in construction, I'm on the phone pretty quickly and I'm letting you know I need this fixed. And getting that fixed doesn't come down to assets. It comes down to people is really how it works. There isn't a business without people.
Well, I think too is you get so busy doing things in the business, you forget who the people are that are really running the business. Like when you start having success, you think that it's you, but it's really the frontline people. It's the people that everybody doesn't know a lot of times, like the drivers, people in the wash bay, the mechanics. And what I've learned is sometimes there may be a guy or a gal that could be a mechanic or a driver who could make a great branch manager or can make a great sales rep. But it's installed in them throughout the industry that they have to go and get this college degree before they can ever be a sales rep.
Yeah.
And I've just always thought that was bullshit, because I just knew myself. I didn't really learn a lot in college as it relates to the rental industry. And in many cases, I mean, mechanics are more knowledgeable about the product than anybody. And it's just giving them the confidence to say, hey, dude, you can be a great sales rep. You're already talking to people on a job site.
Yeah.
It's not that difficult.
Yeah.
No offense to great sales reps, but, sometimes people from within are the best employees. And I have, several people that I've seen develop that have grown into great branch managers because, number one, they're going to get their hands dirty and the other employees are going to respect them,
Yeah. Well, and those drivers or mechanics, they're really the face of the business. They're the only people, the only representatives from your business that interact with the customer on a daily basis. And so if you're not treating them like customer service reps as well, it's a huge missed opportunity. Like there's a dumpster company I know of in the Southwest, and one of their major I don't even know what innovations to being a dumpster company was looking really good. And so making sure all their boxes were really, really well done, all clean, all painted. And if they weren't, they bring them back in, they paint them again, they clean them up again. All their drivers are in the same uniform. All of their trucks are clean. All of their trucks are very professional looking. Everything about them was just look really, really good. And it elevates the whole experience, the whole experience. And it's in theory no different than any other dumpster company. All you need is a dumpster. And when it's full, you need it picked up and you need another one, and you need to make sure they're taking it somewhere, and you need a good price. How can you differentiate yourself? We can just look good. It's like, that's so simple, but so critical, because those drivers, you could just look at it and be like, yeah, they're just drivers. They're just drivers. Or those are the customer service representatives for our entire business. So let's make sure they're good to go. Because if they're good to go, now the rest of the business is good to go. Which is, it's not that complicated, but it's like, wow, that's actually quite rare in a world like this, in a business like this.
Sure. There's this owner that said, you made me think of this. He said one time, we may not know what the hell we're doing, but we're going to look good doing it.
Yeah.
That was kind of it. I mean, they had the nicest looking gear. The yard was always organized. And what I learned from that individual is it actually really did work, because when people they're in an organized environment, and, they have a lot of pride if they're all branded in the same logos and gear, and it kind of, it sets the tone for the culture.
100%.
They have a lot of pride when they go out there.
Yeah. I was thinking today, just before you got here, I was brainstorming. I talked to a multi-billion-dollar, very, very, very successful contractor next month. And I'm talking to, 200-300 leaders. And they wanted me to talk about what other great businesses in this industry do. What have I seen? Because that's what I have to offer people now, is I see more than most people. So What have you seen, and how can we learn from it? And so I was sitting there brainstorming, what is an indicator, a very simple indicator of a great business? What do all these great businesses have in common when it comes to the field? And it's not necessarily how they build stuff, or oftentimes not even their equipment or anything like that. It's the simple stuff. Like I can look at a job site and pretty quickly tell you if odds are this is a great business or not, just because it looks better, just because it's organized, just because all the equipment is lined up as it should be, and just because their materials aren't a mess, just because the dumpster is not overflowing, just because their people have like clean vests that are branded, that are nice. They're not the $7 vests, they're the $37 vests, which matters, which really does matter. Like you can look, their pickup trucks are clean. You can look at a company, look at their job site, and pretty quickly say they're best in class. And I was thinking through all the examples in my head. I'm like, yeah, and there's different ways to do it. Some companies like old equipment, some companies like new equipment. I'm not judging it off of that. I think it's across the board, just how everything's presented, which is, I think, super, super important. Another thing too, you said, is the college education. We've never required a college degree here. And I never anticipate requiring a college degree. I think it's, if you have it, cool. If you want to go to college, cool, go for it. I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's a great chance to learn about who you are without significant consequences, without the weight of the world on your shoulders right away out of high school. But thinking it's going to get you ready for a career, if that's what you're bought into, you're out to lunch.
I mean, I've rethought my entire thought process. My wife and I have on college in general. I mean, I used to think, because when I was growing up, my dad was like, you guys go to college, stay with the same company for 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
Put in 401k, all that kind of good stuff, climb the corporate ladder. Whereas now, I would almost rather my kids start a business, fail, go into bankruptcy, learn a lesson, come out.
Yeah.
And then at the same age, be ready to start. Now, I'm not saying that you should go out and try to get into bankruptcy, but there's nothing wrong with learning through other people. And that's something that I think still has opportunity to evolve in the rental industry, is educating people, around some of the things we're talking about, whether it's raising capital or just how to transition from being a driver or mechanic if you want to move. There's nothing wrong with somebody wanting to be a driver for 35, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
They're no different than someone that's a leader of an organization. They may have different financial status, but what I'm saying is, if somebody has an interest to become more educated inside the industry and mold themselves and get developed to learn new skills, that there's not a lot of colleges out there that teach that in rental. And I'm not saying that it's their responsibility, but I think as leaders, we have an opportunity to continue to teach and educate them based off our own skill sets,
Yeah, I 100% agree. So when you buy this company, the first one, I guess, what were some of the lessons learned when because you jump into the deep end, and you'd never, up until that point, run a company, correct? So you jump into the deep end at this point. What did you learn in that first 6 months?
Great question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. One of the things I learned is there's always going to be stuff that happens like every day. And it's important to have great people around you, because at the end of the day, you're just one person and you're not as great as you may think you are.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I used to think that I was the one doing all these things when I was in corporate America and even starting out in the business. And it's still kind of a hard lesson to learn, is that there's people that are doing a lot of different stuff around you. Now, granted, it may only be 20% of the entire organization that's moving the needle, but leaning into the skill sets of those individuals and seeing how capable they are, that's one of the things I learned in the first 6 months. I would say is like, okay, this guy knows how to do, training very well. This girl knows how to route trucks very well, and figuring out what the pieces of the puzzle are to help the business thrive, to where I can step out of the way. Because sometimes when you try to continue to control things more and more, you just kind of become your own company's problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really a hard lesson, because I'm generally just a doer. I like to get stuff done, but trying to teach people, some of your skill sets, I guess, or to take things away from you and delegate, is continually a tough thing in business, I feel like.
I've noticed too, and to your point on the big company thing, I think people that work for big companies, they have their perception skewed in a way. Like you're more insulated at a big company. And what I mean by that is, I feel like a lot of times you're further away from the work, or you have more resources because it's a bigger company. And I don't know how to explain this right. You falsely think that a lot of that's you.
Yeah.
and it gives you a sense of importance that is not you. It's because you work at a big company, and it's because you're backed by this enormous corporation. And when you don't have that anymore, it's very humbling than I think good for a lot of people, because it's just these people that work for these big companies. A lot of them have this inflated sense of importance, and now I can look right through it, because I'm like, that's not you. You know that, right? Like, that's because you're working for a $17 billion a year company. Like, no wonder you have all these great resources and this and that. But then once you don't have any of that, you start to figure out what you do have real quick and what you are good at, but then more importantly, what you're awful at and what you've been getting by with all these other resources at these bigger companies.
Yeah. No, it's kind of, I mean, that's so accurate. And I think it's tough because you're trying to do a good job at the end of the day. I really do think people think that. And when you start to have success, it does feel like you're doing everything because you're clicking, and I feel like you get in these flow states, at least I do at work, and you start to get more and more confident. And then, that's when I feel like it really gets dangerous, because even recently, having kind of transitioned somewhat out of the equipment rental business and focusing on other things in startup mode, dude, it's like a culture shock. I'm like, well, that's me doing that. That's me doing that. That's me doing that. And then you start to have more and more appreciation for people that have done things for you in the past, even if you're not around them,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's fun to watch from the outside. It's not fun to experience from the inside. So you take over this initial business, and then you said you ended up, a few years later with 40 locations. So there was a string of acquisitions there, I take it, of small family businesses. And they are now all owned by the same entity, but you said you've kept them some separate with their own identity. I think that's very clever, especially in the South, because like you said, it's God freedom country. The South, the United States, is fascinating because every region is so different. Like Nashville, a totally different world than Chicago, a totally different world than Charlotte, a totally different world sometimes than like Memphis. It's just amazing how different regions are so different. But the South especially is very rooted in family, very rooted in a lot of very traditional American ideals. And I feel like you have to meet people where they are in a lot of ways. Like the way I look at it is, especially like the cat dealer here, like Thompson Machinery, they do it's some other dealers in different parts of the United States. They're bigger, and they know they're bigger. Like they're good and they know it. And it's more of like a commercial operation, but that's just, they live in a market that just has a commercial operation. They can operate like that. But Thompson, it's like, you're just doing business with like your uncle or something like that. And I mean that in like the most sincere way. There isn't the big company feel and the rules and this. They're just like helping you out and getting you what you need. Like they're just kind of there to take care of you. And yeah, they still have this big corporate name, Caterpillar, but it's this Southern feel. Like it's very, and I'm using them as an example because I can compare them to other dealers of the same company, and I know them pretty well. And so I feel like you have to do business with that to be successful in the South. And if you push up against it, it doesn't go very well for you.
That's true. I mean, I realized that even on the acquisition trail. I mean, it's always been natural for me to do business in the Southeast, even when I was working for bigger companies, because there is a little bit of that culture. It's you can relate to the guy that's going to church on Sunday or SEC football or whatever is happening. You kind of know the culture and the lingo, and I think one of the things that's underappreciated about the South is a lot of people are real. They're pretty authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, a lot different than, and no offense to anybody, but going to like New York City or, LA in the past on jobs where it's like, wow, I got to really figure this out. How do I connect with this?
Yeah. 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 And well, sometimes you just don't. Like there's just no open door.
Yeah.
And the places like that, New York City and LA, you go there and you just feel like more stressed. Like it's just moving so fast and you're trying to slow it down, but it just won't slow down. And in a lot of ways, you're just getting like run over by it. Whereas here, it's the other side of the spectrum. It's slower. It's more drawn out. And so if you're trying to rush it, it doesn't work for you. It's just like even the work. If I'm watching the work, I think it's slower here. If I were to compare production rates here versus where I grew up in Phoenix, I would be shocked if any of them were more than what's the averages in Phoenix. And again, I'm just speaking purely anecdotal, and that's not one's better than the other. I just feel like it's just how things work here. It's a little bit slower. There's just things are a little bit more drawn out. Everybody's going to church on Sunday. It's there's your college football. There's like I don't know how to explain it because I'm still a newcomer to the South, I guess, in a lot of ways, and I'm still trying to figure out myself.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about the work.
I so badly want to actually create like a production study. And a lot of it is, it's so hard to measure different regions, but it just moves slower here. I just across the board, I think things, and maybe people are going to get upset at me for saying that. It's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it in a bad way. I just think work is carried out differently here than in a place like the Southwest.
It seems like, and this is another assumption, that the relationships are a lot deeper. I feel like it's just me personally because, they want to get time to know you. Mm-hmm. It's not, if somebody's doing business in construction with somebody else, it's not as easy to get in and get their business as it is, I feel like, in some of these other cities, because I can remember even working in national accounts for larger companies. You could go to another big city, give a pitch, and almost get the deal in a meeting. Whereas here, it's like, hey, let's check each other out. What are you into?
Sure.
What are your kids up to?
Yeah.
And I think that the relationships run deep because we're just kind of touching the edge of the surface. There's a lot of hunting. There's a lot of fishing.
Yep.
So there's a lot to that.
Yeah. And even, I've tried to set people up with different vendors or different businesses, and I'll just get like, it makes pretty good business sense, or there's something worth at least exploring. And they'll just be like, nah, like we're good. And in some ways I'm like, shouldn't you at least explore new options? I don't know. There might be a better way to do something. But then, and at the other side of the coin, I almost respect it because it's like, no, we have a good relationship over here.
Yeah.
Why would I go look for greener pastures when this is pretty good? And so I'm just going to stay here, which I really appreciate, because in other places, that is not at all how it works. Like, not even slightly. So you scale this business. What kind of equipment is primarily being rented? Like scissor lifts, telehandlers?
60% aerial, booms, telehandlers, things of that nature. Then a mixture of small compaction, mini excavators, a small dozer here and there. But the vast majority is, general rental type equipment.
Yeah.
Skid steers are huge, obviously.
Yeah.
It's kind of a healthy mix.
I see. And so, you said you're still involved in that business, but is that business now, where's that going?
Well, it's still alive and well.
Yeah.
ERG is a fantastic company. I just kind of stepped out of the day-to-day. I was president, and then we brought in a COO probably a little over a year ago. And it was one of those things where I just felt that I was kind of being called to do something else. And it was like, I really loved my time of doing it, but I'm very much a builder. That's kind of what I've learned of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like there was something telling me, like, you've got to, start something else and develop something else. And I really didn't know at the time. I was just kind of putting it out there, which was kind of risky because you put so much of your identity in what you do, but just talked with my partner, who's the CEO, and investors, and they were all really gracious towards me and respectful. And so it wasn't any kind of, bad leaving or separation. It was just one of those things where I wanted to kind of get back to, at least for myself, creating something new,
I see.
And I think along the way, I learned, business entrepreneurship will teach you a lot about yourself. And I learned, what it is that I like doing. And I'm very much a creator in nature, and building and starting. And that's just kind of, where I was at. And I felt honestly like God was calling me to do something else. So I kind of just, parted ways, stepped out of the day to day, but stayed in as a significant investor. And a lot of those guys and gals are like family to me.
Yeah.
So that's the hardest thing when you're in a business that a lot of people don't think about, is you develop close relationships. And when you're away from them, you miss them and stuff, because that's your work family. And that's probably been, the most difficult. But at the same token, I see, a lot of opportunity in other spaces. And along the journey of just researching rental and stuff, I just thought, man, this rental / equipment, specialty, toilets, dumpsters, fencing, all this other stuff, this is still super early. When going back to some of the things we were talking about early, of how much it still has to evolve and how much opportunity there is, because in the same way that people are transitioning some out of less and less home ownership, in some cases, the true thing is going to happen in equipment. It already has, I feel like, is the reason that you said earlier, more people are renting things because they don't own as much because of the cost of ownership.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to continue to happen for these companies that have, stress on their balance sheet and stuff, because you want to put your capital towards, revenue producing items. And it's not that equipment isn't a revenue producing item, because it is. It's just, it can suck up a lot of your costs,
Well, and you have to have a certain amount of utilization for it to produce, for it to pay for itself, and for you to justify you owning it, which I've learned a lot about from Randy. But if you're, not using the machine substantially, it's probably underutilized, and you're probably better off renting it. And the old school model, not the old school, but the traditional model, I would say, in construction, is I need to own all of my assets. Yeah. and I don't know what it is with some of these old time guys. They almost hoard equipment. And I've seen some of these yards. It's just like, what are you doing with all this stuff? What you have? There's plants growing on that machine. Like, you're not using it. Why do you have it? Get rid of it. Yeah. But they, some of their sense of self-worth and of company worth is looking at their fleet and seeing the machines that they've been able to buy with the revenue of the business. And then I know this machine creates this amount of money per hour, so I know that's making revenue. But a lot of it does not make sense to own nowadays. And I think this next generation of construction business owner especially has an opportunity to rethink that. What do I need to go deploy? How do I need to go deploy my capital with assets that I need to put on my balance sheet? But what can I take off, and what can I go leverage from out elsewhere? And even if it looks like I'm spending more money today than I would be long term, like thinking more long term and realizing, wow, I'm actually getting a way better return on investment renting these assets as needed, because I just don't get the hours out of them.
Yeah. Say what people will about Gen Z and everything else that's been out there. I really think that they're smart, and even I'm kind of a millennial myself, is they're looking for more efficient ways to work. And it's not that they don't want to work. They just actually want the opposite of more production and getting behind a cause, is my personal opinion. And I think that you're going to see more and more people exiting the cost of ownership because of warehousing, because of the insurance, because of what you said of not having it utilized.
Yeah.
And
I mean, interest rates right now, for example.
And so if you get in a tight spot, I mean, it's nothing wrong with selling the assets to hit payroll, and or do whatever you have to do to get more jobs. I mean, it does seem in some cases it can be a little bit of a pride thing, because the same thing happens in the rental world. Yeah. It's like the owner looks out at his yard and says, look at all my new gear. This stuff's awesome. I'm the king of my small little town. But at the end of the day, to be more profitable in some cases, it may mean, less.
Well, and it's always disappointing for me to go to an equipment yard with not very much equipment in it. but I know that's not disappointing for a rental company, an equipment company, or a construction company. If it's in the yard, it's not making money. And unless it's getting cleaned and serviced to go back out, it shouldn't be there because it needs to be making money.
Yeah.
So now you're on to another venture, which I haven't talked to you about this. I've only seen it on social media and from LinkedIn, purely a few LinkedIn posts. Mm-hmm. There's something to do with porta potties, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, everybody's kind of giving me a second look. They're like, "You're doing what?"
Yeah.
But I knew a little bit about porta potties even back at the container business when I was at Mobile Mini because we'd re-rent them, a lot. And there was always challenges with the service aspect of the business. Nobody wants to work and live in a dirty porta potty. And I just kept thinking like, there's got to be something there, Mm-hmm. And I noticed within toilets, there wasn't a lot of big, larger companies. There's a couple, but not at the scale of equipment rental. And there's still a lot of evolution that's going to take place with how the user experience happens, things of that nature. And I really did want to go to the ground level and see if I could do something again,
mm-hmm.
And like rebuild and get my hands a little dirtier, so to speak. And so that's kind of one of the things that drove me and attracted me to it. And just exploring the community, it's really eye-opening because the people are really good people, very welcoming. There's still that competitive edge that you talked about, seems to be so far. But I mean, the opportunity for service in a service-based business is in toilets, and there's not a whole lot of point of entry. It's relatively easy to get in the space.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that were attracted to me.
How much does a porta potty cost?
I mean, you can get a construction unit for like $750.
Wow.
You can get some of the event ones a little bit nicer, $850.
I see.
$900, and then you get up into the luxury. Restrooms.
Well, they have some fancy ones nowadays. Some really fancy ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, porta potties, it's such a essential yet totally overlooked thing. Like you say porta potties, and I've been wired to recognize opportunity too now through business. And so you say that and you're like, wow, tons of opportunity. And you can take a lot of the principles you've learned from equipment rental and go apply them there, I think very successfully. And there isn't a national provider. As I'm sitting here thinking, it's everywhere you go. It's this different porta potty provider. It's like Don's John's or, some local outfit in every region. And there's some bigger, I'm thinking like a Honey Bucket, for example. Like you'll see that in a few different states, but you don't see a porta potty on the East Coast that's the same as the West Coast. There's not a similar provider. And then talk about a service business. Like if that thing's not cleaned and that thing's not up to snuff, that sucks. I think everybody can relate to going into a porta potty that has not had the right amount of service, which is not cool. It's not cool for anybody at all. But you go into a nice porta potty and you almost like every time I walk into a clean porta potty, I almost take like a breath of relief. I'm like, thank goodness, because I was prepared. You before you open that door, you kind of have to mentally prepare yourself. Like, what am I going to see in here? I don't know. And then it's clean. You're like, which is how it should be all the time.
Yeah.
But it is by no means that way because I have sampled so many porta potties at this point.
Porta potty connoisseur.
Hey, if you need market research, I'm your guy. Yeah.
There's United Site Services is out there, and obviously
That's a big one. Yeah.
Honey Buckets, but it's a ton of locals, and I mean the puns are endless.
There's a lot of them. Yeah.
But it's not just construction. In this case, there's events.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, believe it or not, some of the nice ones are big at weddings, festivals.
Sure. Yeah.
Concerts, industrial. It's kind of a healthy mix.
Yeah. I have you ever been to the Waste Management Open in Scottsdale?
Yeah, I have.
So it's well, I guess when did you go? How many years ago?
And that's probably been
okay. So a little bit, but it was still probably pretty busy when you were there. Yeah. So now it's what I think is the biggest sporting event in the United States by attendance for the entire event. It's split over a few different days, but it's like 250,000 people per day, which is it is wild how many people are there on the weekend. And the last time I was there, we were on the 16th hole, which is the famous one with the stadium all the way around it, and it just gets bigger and bigger every year. Now it's, multiple floors. And I mean, it seats like 15, 20,000 people around a par 3 hole, it's the only thing like it in the sport of golf. The only thing like it in just sports in general. And, the 16th is nice. You have these boxes and you're overlooking the hole. It's a really, really nice setup, and you have food and free alcohol and all this. And they have these like porta potty villages that are, built up on the second floor. And, it's porta potty hallways, it's just porta potties this way, this way, this way. You have like 40 of them in one place. And you get there in the morning and the, first golfers are coming through and you're drinking, most everybody's drinking, or at least the last time I was there, I was drinking. So you got to go to the bathroom quite a bit. And, first time you go to the bathroom, it's the first time of the day and everything's nice and clean. Then you go there middle of the day and you're like, all right, like there's some degradation here because they're not getting service, middle of the day. And then you go like towards the end and it's just like a war scene. You're just like you have not safe to go in. No, you have to open like 4 different doors to find one that's even like not a total biohazard scene to go into to take a pee. And you start to appreciate like big time the people that service those and the quality of service in general. Just that to me was a very good lesson in how important it is to service these things regularly. Because when there's a lot of people using them, it just gets from bad to horrible in like a span of 5 hours.
I can imagine the service on that particular event, but you get it multiple services, so you can service it 2 times a week, 3 times a week, and a lot of people see them out at soccer fields and places like that where it's only like a one-time service, but the events are multiple services around the reasons that you're saying. So
yeah,
some wild things in those events that happen.
What's frustrating? The thing that's most frustrating with me about porta potties is how people don't put the lid down. It's like that's how they work. They don't smell as bad, or really don't smell all that much if you put the lid down. But no one puts the lid down, and so you walk in, you're like, how hard is it? As you're walking out, just flip the lid down. It's not that hard. It's so frustrating.
A lot of them don't have them,
Yeah, but I have the lid down, and then you have the little vent, and you get rid of what you got to get rid of from like a gas standpoint, and the place doesn't smell. It's like this is something a 5-year-old should understand. And I was in Australia recently, and I peed in a porta potty that I thought had a great innovation. It had the urinal part of it, and it had like a check valve, like a one-way valve that would just automatically close when you were done peeing. So the gases couldn't come out of the porta potty area into the overall, couldn't come out into the overall porta potty area. I'm like, now that's clever. That's really clever. Cool. Or when they have the mints in there.
You like the mints in there?
That's one of my favorite jokes. Like the little white things you pee on. Yeah.
We were joking about just putting different memes like inside of them.
Yeah.
Different ones like hope you brought your book in.
Yeah.
Don't act like an animal in here. Stuff that a lot of it's written on the walls by hand.
Sure. Yeah. or maybe like a little coloring area.
Yeah.
Color
here.
Yeah, color here. Yeah.
Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah, or put a target. Like I every time I go into a urinal with like a target or something in a bar, I'm like, why don't they all have this? This is so clever. This is so much fun. Or the little ones with like the little soccer ball. Have you seen those? Oh man,
the soccer ball in the toilet.
Yes, yeah, it's like a little goal. It's like a game. And so at like the fair, you'd use like a squirt gun to if you hit the ball right, it starts to spin around.
Oh, wow.
But you're supposed to pee on it. And
some innovation.
And you are locked in. You're so focused the whole time. Some
good ideas now.
Yeah, you're not peeing on the floor with that in there because you've got a target. Yeah.
That's brilliant.
But I think you could have a lot of fun with porta potties. You could, great service. A lot of opportunity there, but yeah, it's just something that is so overlooked, but such a important part of, I know, construction culture for sure. And I know it's an important part of events, but just from like a construction culture standpoint, a porta potty joke is one of the safest jokes you can make.
They're endless.
They're endless. It's just
it
like,
really
yeah.
It really is. But I mean, everybody wants to, I think, I don't know. I would think that everybody wants to experience somewhat of a clean bathroom. And I know some people care less than others.
Yeah.
They'll just go anywhere.
Yeah.
But I think having, a clean porta john is important to a worker,
Yes. Yeah. I do think, like, being serious for once, I do think those little things are huge for the sake of retention and from workforce development. And it sounds crazy, but I think those small details are what matter more in a lot of ways. And those are the small things that just grind you down over time. If every time you have to go to the bathroom, you have to deal with this terrible situation, that grinds you down over time. And then you're sitting there just thinking like, what am I doing? It's 5-minute experience, but something like that can really kind of take you down a few notches, even if it's just a few hours. Probably not ruin your day. If it's ruining your day, it's really bad. Yeah. But that's the kind of stuff that I think just mentally wears people down. And if we can avoid that for these workers, I think that's essential so that they can dedicate themselves to their actual craft, which is already mentally taxing, is already physically taxing, is already requiring enough of them. So why are we creating other obstacles, other hoops for them to jump through in a given day with porta potties?
I mean, that's 100% accurate, because as the owner or even the leader of the project, the ultimate thing that you're trying to do is continue to perform, but build out that culture.
Yeah.
And I think that the work environment, whether it's a toilet or the corner of a job site, some of the things we were talking about earlier, if it's cleanliness, if it's organized, people are going to appreciate it. They're going to have pride where they come into work on both sides of the business, and so I think it's a little bit underrated, because we get so busy going down the path of either performance or making money, but there is something to be said in the workplace environment of what people come into, your workers,
Yeah. Well, and you want to talk, there's I've talked a little bit about this. Like, one of the fun things to say is like, we need more women in construction. Like, yeah. Like, I don't think anybody's going to argue that, but I think it's just a silly thing just to say. It's like, so what are you doing about it? Like, what's your bathroom situation look like? For example, what does your porta potty situation look like? And guys, they can get away with peeing kind of anywhere. And I know that's starting to get less and less kosher, but especially if you're an equipment operator, you can just pull over and just pee where you're at. That's still pretty standard, and I think preferred. At least it is in my case.
Yeah.
But if you're a woman, you can't do that. You don't have that option to do that. You need a good bathroom all the time. And so if your bathroom sucks, it's like, that's a little thing that adds up over time. That makes a big difference. And so I think when it comes to even that conversation, this applies. It's those little things like, okay, cool. Yeah, we do need more women in the industry. Great. So what are you doing about it? What changes are you making to your business to actually accommodate that? And that's one of those little things that I think is totally totally something to look at. A small change that I think would make a significant difference. Or we went to a mine with Suncor up in Canada this time last year.
That was cool.
It was amazing. It was so cool. I was actually just talking to a contractor this morning that works up there, Thompson. They said it was minus 60 a few days ago, which is, at that point, you don't shut equipment off and you have to be really careful with it, or else stuff just snaps because the steel gets so brittle and the hydraulics don't work and all kinds of crazy stuff happens to machines. And he's like, yeah, it's like minus 30 now. And he's in Celsius. So I think at like minus 42 or 45, it gets the same Fahrenheit and Celsius. But minus 20 Celsius is like, I think, just under 0 Fahrenheit. So it's still pretty frosty. Yeah. But they're like, this is perfect. That's what they want. They don't want it close to freezing because then everything, it doesn't thaw out. So it's rock solid underfoot. But they don't want it super cold. So there's like their happy place is like minus 20, minus 30. Anyway. Whereas here, everybody's losing their mind because it's 15 degrees Fahrenheit. They had, in the middle of the pit, they have bathrooms, but they have a specific room, like a mother's room for their women truck drivers, which is great. They've made a huge push to hire more women for driving trucks, because man, woman, shouldn't really matter. You're driving a haul truck. You're driving in a mine. You're running equipment. But it was that little thing. Like, okay, so what if women have children? Sure. Okay. Well, when you have children, you've got to every day,
nursing room.
Yeah, you need a space to go to be able to feed your child, even when your child's not with you. So, well, they can't drive up to the mine. Why don't we just put it in the mine? It's like, that makes perfect sense. That is something that's so simple, but so important, that actually says, we're not just saying this. We're serious about this, and we're going to make changes to actually accommodate it. And while that's not porta potty specific, I feel like it's a tangent of that.
What you're saying is how it's still, I was just sitting here thinking how it still has so much opportunity to evolve, because of those type of things and the user experience, and not even in just porta potties, but several different aspects, because as it becomes easier in some ways to do work, I would say, people are going to look for more and more conveniences. I truly do think,
Yeah.
But that's something that's still, I think personally, has to evolve, is kind of the condition of, at least the restroom experience,
Yeah.
Even some of these machines now, it's a lot nicer getting in them than speaking back on equipment than when I jumped in the business.
Especially a cold day, like it's been the past week or two. I would rather have a machine with a cab on it than not a cab on it.
Yeah,
when it's especially this time this year.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this business, is it, since it's not as capital intensive, it probably still requires quite a bit of capital.
Yeah.
Is it a different model to grow it? Or are you still buying companies, or are you growing it organically? What does the future look like? A little bit of both. Who knows?
It's a little bit of both, I would say. Right now, what's different in this versus the equipment is I'm still learning it, and we're moving a little bit slower. I started this one with a green start in Franklin, whereas the other one we just started with a bunch of acquisitions and already knew the equipment rental business from being in it years before. But there's so many little different steps that you would never think about, of getting a letter to go to the dump to dump the toilets, to get an inspection from the state, to get a permit, and so all those things I wanted to learn and feel really good about on my own, with my own capital, before bringing outsiders in to do M&A acquisitions, or to grow and expand organically.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like you said earlier, because I did build a 5-year business plan. And I was thinking the whole time, man, I'm going through this thing, I'm like, all this stuff's going to look so different in the end, because you can have the best laid plans, and then when the customer, the situations, things change, you pivot, and I feel like you go to where, at least me, to where the demand is. So the goal is to obviously grow it throughout the Southeast in a similar fashion, but it's not like this rush or anything. And, I'm kind of at the point where I want to have fun doing it. I'm 42 now and we've got 3 kids. And so that time with those kids I realize now will move by really fast. So I want to be present with them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, have fun with it, because my son loved the equipment stuff. He still does. And so now he's ready to get in the potty truck.
Yeah.
So it's more of a like bringing my family along with this one. I talk more about work at home now,
That's cool.
Whereas it was, I don't know if we said this out in the hall or whatever, but I was totally separate. It was like, this was my work life.
Yeah.
And this was my personal life. And those two didn't blend. But now I've kind of just really honestly blended the two to where I'd go around my dad or whoever, and I would never talk about work much. They'd have to pry it out of me.
Yeah.
Now I'm just pretty much an open book.
Yeah. And that's, I guess, I'm speaking to a group in Duluth in a few days. And that's one of the big things is it's a group focused on helping with mine permitting and for mining and oil and gas in the United States. And that's one of the big things is we've got to tell our story. And it starts at the dinner table. Your kids know what you do. Does your family know what you do? Do they know what's important? Do they know how you do it? Because I don't know if the majority of people out there in the dirt world, wherever they are, could say yes. And, I'm sitting here, my family doesn't understand what I do. And I've just pretty quickly said, well, it's just not even worth it. But that's a bad attitude. That's on me to explain what I do. And their lack of understanding is my fault, not their fault. And I think until we all tell that story and just explain, even to our own households, what it is that we do and why it's important, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah. Well, I think as men, we're kind of closed off, and you don't ever really want to see like, oh shit, the sky's falling or vulnerable. But I've learned when you own a business or you're leading a business, sometimes your spouse, if you have one, or whoever in your family, can kind of get more comfortable about what the plan is if they're in the loop.
Yes.
And I've noticed it with my wife is talking through things. And it's surprisingly, shame on me, she'll have some zingers. I'll be like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, because they're looking at it without all the emotion and they just have an outside perspective. And hey, you think about that, and like, I hadn't thought about that. And I wish I would have, because that's so obvious. Yeah.
Kids are the best too. My daughter's 8 and she'll ask the simplest question. And you're like, I need to figure that out. I don't know. And you should know the answer. So that's another solid point of communicating with them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's so exciting. Just building a business, and however, it's just huge opportunity. However you see you should build it, bring the family along.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. You could have a ton of fun with porta potties. I'm sitting here thinking about it. I'm like, oh yeah, you could have a ton of fun. You could make them all look like wood, and so they look like outhouses. I'm just thinking of all dumb shit.
The wood potties.
Yeah. You can do all kinds of stuff. All kinds of stuff. Okay. Well, I'm excited. I hope to see your porta potties all over.
Yeah. We'll make a little bit of a splash. It takes us some time to get ramped up, But, I feel really good about actually a guy's transition out of private equity to come and work with me in this and in kind of a startup fashion. So
that's awesome.
He wrote an incredible thesis. I've tried to get him to send it out, but he wrote it. He went to Vanderbilt and wrote it about the equipment rental industry. And I read it. I was like, man, this is pretty good. And he just kind of had a passion for getting into rental. And I just kept in touch with him. And I said, hey, dude, you know anything about potties?
Yeah.
He said, no, but I'm willing to learn. So he and I kind of started it. And then my nephew is coming up from the equipment rental business. He was there for several years. And he's going to be starting next week, actually. So
awesome.
Awesome. Should be fun and family involved. So
to build a porta potty empire.
Yeah. There's actually a crazy story, man. I'll have to send it to you. It's about this guy out of New York. I can't think of his name, but should be a mini series. It's on a toilet with a couple different New York style families that a friend of mine sent. And it's a long article, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it's mob or mafia related of the theme of Northeast.
Yeah.
But it's truly should be a mini series.
There is certainly themes of that in business, or even if it's not any of that, which I think would be naive to say at this point, and just in business in general up there, not even one industry. They don't want outsiders.
Yeah.
They're not gonna welcome you with open arms by any stretch of the imagination. So me as like this young gun upstart, you know what, I'm gonna start a new business in New York. Like, this is gonna be awesome. There's so many customers. They will. They I don't think they'll be super stoked about it. Yeah. But I'd love to check that out. I love reading about stuff like that. Well, cool. I'm glad you were able to stop by despite the snow. And I'm just excited to follow along. I'll be following on LinkedIn, that's for sure. Is that the best place to follow your stuff?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn. I mean, we've we're dabbling some with YouTube and Instagram. Still trying to figure that stuff out, but I'll continue to update through LinkedIn on Portigo, that's the name of the company. So
sweet.
And 833 Portigo.
833 Portigo.
We got the phone number and everything.
You need the phone number.
Yeah.
That's
I always love a good phone number, man.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I'm just kind of a sucker for that.
I think to be a successful porta potty company, a successful injury law firm, there's like a few businesses that you need a good phone number. Else just if you don't get that, good luck. You're not going to do it.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me.
Cool. Yeah.
It's cool down here.
That's it.